This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Taliban says it's close to forming a new government as it takes charge after U.S. withdrawal. USAID accuses Ethiopia's TPLF of looting humanitarian aid. And Nigerian leaders agreed to forgive more than 3,000 insurgents. We tell you why. This is Africa Live. Hello and welcome to the show. I am Peninah Karibe. Also coming up this hour. In business, South Africa's state power utility turns away from using coal plants to supply electricity. And in sports, Africa dominate women's T41 discus throw as Tunisia's Tlitli takes gold. The Taliban says it's close to forming a new government. According to senior Taliban leader Anas Haqqani, the final outcome is expected in the following few days. In a news conference Tuesday, the Taliban said they welcome foreign investments in Afghanistan and the new government will seek friendly ties with other countries. Spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid said the Taliban's priority is the interests of the country and people, and they will be committed to maintaining security and promoting economic development. For more, we're joined by Zmaryalai Abbasin in Kabul. Zmaryalai, the Taliban has said it is close to forming a new government. Can you update us on the progress that has been made so far? Zmaryalai, can you hear me? All right, I'm afraid we seem to have a problem with him, but we'll try and just get him back in a bit. So earlier, Taliban spokesperson Zabihullah Mujahid spoke exclusively with CGTN over questions around the future of Afghanistan.
In
the name of Almighty Allah, it is a proud day for the people of Afghanistan that we have dealt a huge defeat to a country that invaded us. With the end of this occupation, we bring prosperity to our country, and I feel very happy that we achieved the results of our sacrifices, and as a result today, we got Afghanistan rid of all the invaders, and now Afghans can live freely.
When will you announce the new government? Will it be an Islamic government or a mixed government?
Without any doubt, it will be an Islamic government. People have made huge sacrifices for the establishment of an Islamic government. Whatever the combination, it should be Islamic. It being Islamic is guaranteed. However, it would be properly, though, over. We currently have discussions and we've had consultations. Hopefully, the leadership would come to a good conclusion.
How is your preparation for the airport operations? The foreign troops have destroyed almost everything. How much time will it take for resuming the operations?
Yes, we had two problems there. First, stabilising security. We've created a special force for the security of the airport who will maintain the security at the airport. Secondly, there are technical problems, as lots of damage has been made there. When the Americans left, they destroyed many things, the details of which are shared with the media as well. And we're hopeful our technical team solves these problems soon so that normal operations resume.
Civil services are almost fully stopped. What is the preparation for the Islamic Emirate for its resumption that will make people hopeful, especially as everything is unclear nowadays?
Yes, we are trying. Firstly, one of the most important services is security. People are provided with good security and the rule of law established. Secondly, in the health sector, where an acting overseer is assigned and the health services are provided. Initial works have also begun in the banking sector and have started their services. In the media sector, we've also ensured that the system is running. Similarly, efforts in the sector of education are in progress. Other sectors will also be operational soon. We hope that the government is announced soon and everything gets back to normal.
All right, let's go back to Kabul and check out Zmaryalai's connection once more. Zmaryalai, can you hear me now? Zmarialai, can you hear me? Apologies for that connection. We seem to not be able to get that connection right. Anyways, let's move now to US, and the President Joe Biden has defended his handling of the troop withdrawal and addressed the nation about the way forward after 20 years of military presence in Afghanistan. Our correspondent Nathan King has more at the White House.
Presidential, but also acting as his role as commander-in-chief, essentially saying no other nation could have done what the US has done over the last couple of weeks. 120,000 people extracted from Kabul airport. He called it a success while paying tribute to the 13 service people who died. He talked about seeing their remains coming off the planes at Dover Air Force Base, a debt we can never repay and never forget, he said. But also, he pointed the finger, even though he claimed victory for the chaotic, but let's face it, he says successful pullout. He also blamed the Afghans for folding so quickly, the Afghan government, the armed forces, although the armed forces had little choice after the Americans were essentially putting out all support. Let's take a listen.
The assumption was that more than 300,000 Afghan national security forces that we had trained over the past 2 decades and equipped would be a strong adversary in their civil wars with the Taliban. That assumption that the Afghan government would be able to hold on for a period of time beyond military drawdown turned out not to be accurate.
He also said that he blamed the Trump administration for cutting a deal with the Taliban, which released so many prisoners who are now part of the military commanders, added to their strength, and also ISIS-K prisoners as well. And he said he's the 4th US president to inherit this war, and he wasn't going to pass it on to another one. Now let's see what this effect is going to have domestically. I think it was a speech very well written for the American psyche, ending the forever wars, moving on, saying their values will remain intact. They will start diplomatically focusing on the rights of women and girls, not at the barrel of an occupation gun. That's not a bad argument. But let's face it, US power has never looked so humbled in Asia in 50 years. I'm thinking of Vietnam as the last time. But he said, look, let's not fight these challenges of 2001. Let's fight the ones of 2021. And as you know, US strategy from Trump to Biden is very much focused on China. So the world will be watching, but no more so than in Beijing, Moscow, and elsewhere. Nathan King, CGTN, at the White House.
Now, the Taliban has pledged not to support destabilizing activities against other countries. Also, there are no indications the current Taliban is allied to al-Qaeda. However, the Islamic State branch in Afghanistan carried out attacks near Kabul's airport that killed more than 170 people. The group appears focused to continue with attacks. Islamic State also has a presence in North Africa, including Egypt, where the government is carrying out military offensives against the group in the Sinai region. For more on this, let's cross over now to Adel Mahroui, who's live for us in Cairo. Adel, thank you for joining us. The Taliban is now in charge in Afghanistan. What is the likely impact of the takeover by the Taliban on Islamic State operations there in Egypt?
Well, basically, we have to realize that Taliban and ISIS are not the same group. Both of them are Islamic groups. Both of them are armed groups, as well as al-Qaeda. However, there are core and fundamental ideological differences that makes them actually foes instead of allies, and therefore there isn't any expectation that the rise of the Taliban in Afghanistan would have an impact on ISIL. In fact, in 2020, Taliban has been in a war against ISIS inside Afghanistan, and later on the US Central Command has also confirmed that it has given some logistical support, however limited, to Taliban in its fight against ISIL. Also, on the other hand, al-Qaeda, which is another armed group that was founded in Afghanistan mostly by Arabs and has become quite spread in this region, it too had its clashes with ISIL, and there was an armed conflict between al-Qaeda and ISIL in Syria and in Libya. So overall, there doesn't seem to be any direct impact that would encourage or give any kind of support to ISIL in Egypt or across the world. In fact, having Taliban rising to manage the entire country of Afghanistan could help it to continue this anti-ISIL campaign that it started last year.
So Islamic State Islamic State attacks on Egypt's military claimed the lives of 12 troops. That was in August and July. How is Egypt responding to these threats?
Egypt has been in an ongoing military campaign against ISIL and all extremist groups in northern Sinai since 2018. Non-stop military activity, counter-terrorism activity by both the armed forces and the police have been ongoing almost continuously. The latest report was in August after an attack by ISIL, where the armed forces announced that it has killed about 89 terrorists in North Sinai and stopped hundreds of vehicles that includes arms and militants who tried to infiltrate the Egyptian border from neighboring countries into the mainland of Egypt, fueling this terrorist activity. So the action is ongoing. It has been more or less quite quiet since before the August ISIL attack. There hasn't been any indication of a significant attack in North Sinai except in December 2020. So the frequency of terrorist attacks in Egypt has been greatly decreasing, and it is expected to go on in that trend as long as the Egyptian armed forces keeps up its military activity there.
Adel, we appreciate that. Thank you very much for joining us. Adel Mahrouri, live in Cairo. Now to discuss further the impact the Afghanistan withdrawal will have on terrorism in Africa, we're joined by our guest, Martin Ewi. Martin is the Transnational Organized Crime Regional Observatory Coordinator for Southern Africa at the Institute for Security Studies, and he joins us now via Zoom from Pretoria. Martin, the U.S. President Joe Biden has said the decision to leave Afghanistan is also about ending an era of major military operations to remake other countries. What are the implications of this decision for Africa?
Thank you very much, Peninah, and good afternoon from Pretoria to your viewers. Indeed, this is a major turning decision. I would say it's a watershed event in history. Not that it is a new event. We've seen this over and over. You will recall the end of the Cold War, or when the Iron Curtains came down. Africa suffered the same effect, where major powers withdrew from the continent and left us to man our own security. That's had indeed far-reaching implications. First, in the sense that it elevated local solutions to local problems. Which is what many people on the continent have always been looking for. But now the world after the Cold War has significantly changed, and Africa too has changed. For a long time now, I think the US has played a critical role, especially when it comes to fighting terrorism around the continent, where they have been able to boost local effort, and in some cases they've played a leadership role, whether you are looking at it in the Sahel or you're looking at it in the Horn of Africa, where they have been fighting groups like the Al-Shabaab and other ISIS-related affiliates. Now, if the US is going to withdraw, would this have any implication? I think that withdrawal in Africa has been on for quite some time. You will recall during the period of President Trump, who actually withdrew a significant number of US troops in Africa, 5,000 or just more than 5,000 of them at the time. So the US, since the end of the Cold War, had never really played an instrumental role in terms of deploying American troops on the ground in Africa. Yes, the few that have been around, we've also seen episodes in history where some of them have been withdrawn from the continent. Again, the incident that's occurred with President Trump taking out quite a good number of American troops from the continent did not really leave any void or did not create a serious incident that we can actually refer to in terms of the implication. But what this means actually is that It empowers local stakeholders. It empowers local actors, to take things into their own hands. We saw, especially at the end of the Cold War, when the Americans and the French withdrew, the rise of the ECOWAS peacekeeping force, the ECOMOG, and other regional forces that also came to play to fill the void that was left by these major powers. Okay. And I think since then, the lessons have come home in Africa that we need to play a significant role in our own peacekeeping or in our own promotion of peace and security on the continent. So the decision by President Biden, I don't think that is going to have any significant implication. I know my colleagues, other analysts, have actually warned that it will have significant implications because of the COVID-19 effect and the role that the Americans have been playing. Look, I think we need to understand this withdrawal well, that it is not an abandonment. It is not, what I see, it's a change in tactic. The Americans in Afghanistan have used a tactic that they have not used in Africa, which is to put troops on the ground, put boots on the ground. And what they are doing now is to withdraw those boots. I don't think that it is withdrawal in terms of ideology or in terms of supporting local actors or in terms of fighting the terrorists and other criminal actors in the region. Right. I think this will continue, but in a different method. And I think the same thing will happen in Africa. They will empower local actors. They will empower government, probably train more, which is the strategy that a lot of people have been advocating for, rather than an imposed external peace from America.
All right, Martin, we appreciate those insights. Thank you very much for joining us. Martin Ewi joining us via Zoom from Pretoria in South Africa. You're watching Africa Live. Let's take a short break. Coming up, USAID accuses Ethiopia's TPLF of looting humanitarian aid. And new South African coronavirus variant spreads to more countries.
Africa is a continent of diversity, with varied climates and enchanting geography, and a people so distinct, but with a shared enduring spirit. We are at the heart of the continent to bring you the untold stories.
Let's have a look.
We celebrate Africa as it shapes its own destiny.
Tunis, Cairo, Juba, Ethiopia, Tanzania.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
Authorities in Nigeria's northeastern state of Borno have agreed to pardon over 3,000 insurgents as part of efforts to restore peace in the troubled region. The country has been battling an insurgency for 12 years, which has claimed the lives of more than 30,000 people and displaced over 2 million more, according to the United Nations. Our correspondent Phili Haza reports from Abuja.
The Borno state government confirmed that all 3,000 insurgents who laid down their arms and surrendered to the Nigerian military were members of the Boko Haram sect. The state governor, Babangana Zulum, who presided over a meeting with all the repentant members and other top government officials, says that apart from the 3,000 ex-terrorists currently in the custody of the government, an additional 900 have surrendered to the Cameroonian forces. Cameroon borders Nigeria and has been jointly battling the insurgents for over a decade, with Borno State as the epicenter. Governor Zulum says the government is working on various programs geared towards dealing with the repentant insurgents with caution and within the law. He emphasized the need for proper data capturing about the Boko Haram insurgents before releasing them into society. The leaders at the meeting also agreed to work towards establishing a world-class de-radicalization and rehabilitation center in Borno State to facilitate work with repentant terrorists and prevent them from being recruited back into insurgent groups. Phil Ihaza, CGTN, Abuja.
Let's now get the latest on the coronavirus pandemic. South African scientists have detected a new COVID variant. The new variant, known as C12, has spread to most of South Africa and 7 other countries after being first found in May. It contains many mutations associated with other variants, but researchers say it's yet to be determined whether C12 is more contagious and what impact it has on the immunity provided by vaccines. And still in South Africa, there are plans to add sign language to the country's 11 official languages. The move is led by the country's Departments of Justice and Correctional Services, as well as Arts and Culture. After years of lobbying, organizations representing the deaf community in the country believe the official recognition will unlock new employment and educational opportunities for deaf people. CGTN's Travis Andrews has more details.
For many deaf people in South Africa, finding employment can be a significant challenge. That's because the language barrier has been an obstacle, but the government hopes deaf people can now overcome that. There are plans to make sign language South Africa's 12th official language, and it's a move that has been a long time coming.
We started with this process of getting South African Sign Language official. So in 2013 and 2015, we came before Parliament and to start the deliberations on submitting a submission to change the constitution to having South African Sign Language as 12 official language, because we've got 11 official languages.
In Cape Town, I Love Coffee is a chain of coffee shops that employ deaf people. The move to add sign language as an official language is something they have been advocating for and have warmly welcomed.
As an employer of the deaf, we wholeheartedly support the adoption of sign language as an official language. For us, it would mean our staff would have better access to education, which would give them much better chances of employment. And also, we notice our customers have a great interest in sign language, which our staff love to teach. So I think there's a natural love of sign language that our country can get behind.
According to some stakeholders, the official recognition of sign language means it will become a language that anyone should learn and not just those from the deaf community. While the constitutional amendment to have sign language adopted as an official language is currently before Parliament, the Education Department has recognized sign language as an official home language, and that means it can be tested as an examinable subject for a national senior certificate, which opens up further opportunities for those from the deaf community.
South African Sign Language is an official language, then it will create many opportunities and employment opportunities for deaf people. And the opportunities that will be created will be in hospitals, municipalities, police services, health services.
For now, though, deaf organizations will continue to advocate for the linguistic, educational and employment rights of deaf people, until the day sign language becomes South Africa's 12th official language. Travis Andrews, CGTN, Cape Town.
The U.S. government's humanitarian agency, USAID, says forces from Ethiopia's Tigray region have looted humanitarian aid from its warehouses in Amhara region. USAID's mission director in Ethiopia says the warehouses were completely emptied. War broke out in the mountainous region between Ethiopian troops and the TPLF in November last year. The conflict has claimed the lives of thousands and caused a humanitarian crisis. USAID estimates that up to 900,000 people in Tigray are in famine conditions and 5 million others are in desperate need of humanitarian assistance. Let's now cross over to Gurum Chala. He's live for us in Dubai for more on this. Gurum, it's good to have you with us. Tell us more about this. How is this matter being addressed? All right, I'm afraid we've got a problem with that connection with Gurum in Dubai. Let's move on to South Africa. The Kruger National Park is home to the largest population of rhinos in the world, but their numbers are declining fast as poachers continue to hunt the animals with their hounds. In the first 6 months of this year, over 700 poaching incidents were recorded in the park. Sumitra Naidu visited the park to find out more about the efforts to curb the killings.
132 rhinos were killed in the Kruger National Park this year. COVID restrictions and the hard lockdown meant no visitors to the park. It worked as a deterrent, but as tourists returned, so did the poachers. Security in the park has been stepped up, including stop and search procedures.
We use camera systems, try to have total control of the roads. It is also for safety for our tourists. If we know a person get lost, we can look where the vehicle was last seen and so on. So that is an area that we're developing quite on. But we can also monitor vehicles that going around and come into the park, do poaching and do drop-off of poachers and those type of things.
The Kruger Park's K9 unit is one measure that is being strengthened to save the animals.
K9 unit is 95% effective on all our arrests. So every arrest that we make or every incursion we have, there is dogs being used. The dog unit started in about 2011, 2012, and it just escalated from there. And we started and built one of the biggest units in Africa.
Rhino poaching remains a massive challenge, especially here at the Kruger National Park. The area is vast, spanning over 2 million hectares. Tracking animals or poachers is very difficult.
The K9 unit rangers are doubling up, helping to remove wire snares. Poachers use the snares to capture and kill rhino. Park authorities receive calls daily of animals injured or killed by the sharp wire.
The more the animal struggles, the more it tightens around the animal's neck.
There's been an increase in arrests. Prosecutors say over 70 people are still in custody on charges of poaching.
People do it for money, just to kill it for the one. It is devastating each time to experience that. There's also quite an emotional thing where contacts happen between shootouts between field rangers and poachers, to see that people lost their lives for something that is worth so little. An actual fact, and that from people using their influences from other countries to get rid of our animals.
The Skukuza court in the Kruger Park that focuses on poaching cases has been upgraded. With COVID-eased restrictions, prosecutors hope to proceed with more convictions. Sumitra Nadu, CGTN, in the Kruger National Park, South Africa.
The Masai Mara is by far Kenya's most popular game reserve and is considered among the best globally. Its main attraction has been the great wildebeest migration. CGTN's Robert Nagila takes us along to experience the Mara with him.
Hello?
Are you ready?
I'm on my way. It is said a visit to the Masai Mara is an unforgettable experience. That's what we want to find out. Now, this is Robert Kingori. Robert, say hi to the viewers.
Hi.
Now, show me the best of the Mara. Wait. Zebras. Less than 100 meters outside our tented camp, and already zebras all around us. Brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Look, wildebeest. So these will likely be crossing the Mara River over to Tanzania in the next few weeks.
Now, let me go and show you the big five.
Okay, forward.
Look, it's a small herd of elephants. Such amazing creatures. Beautiful.
Hardly an hour's gone past. We've already seen wildebeest, zebras, elephants.
Here are the giraffes.
It does look like the National Reserve is on fire, but that is a controlled fire. Asante sana. All right, Whoa. So that was quite the game drive. Missed out on buffaloes and rhinos, but as they say here, tomorrow's another day. Robert Nagila, CGTN, Masai Mara, Kenya.
And coming up in business news, South Africa ditches coal-fired power for cleaner energy. And come 2022, Egypt will have its first sovereign Sharia-compliant Islamic bonds.
This has taken me completely out of my depth, but at the same time it's exciting. It's new, it's different, it's a challenge.
It's really exciting.
Africa Live. Find your voice.
South Africa's state power utility is turning away from coal-fired power. Eskom says it won't take on any new coal developments beyond 2030. It's an ambitious target for the utility that relies on coal to provide 90% of the country's electricity needs. Sumitra Naidu tells us more.
Eskom is under pressure to reduce its reliance on fossil fuels. Two proposed new coal-fired power stations have already been halted by courts over environmental considerations.
I think Eskom, like utilities around the world, have started to realize that the economics of coal have just changed fundamentally in the last 10 years. So not only is it now apparent that new coal is no longer competitive, that new coal is more expensive than alternatives.
The utility plans to take advantage of the available global concessional finance mechanisms. Independent power producers are rushing in to bid for the upcoming windows that will see the utility procure 6,800 megawatts more renewable energy.
There is a huge amount of interest in financing some aspects of this transition from foreign governments, from international finance institutions and development finance institutions, largely because it's cheaper to lower carbon in South Africa than in the developed world.
But Eskom has warned that South Africans will eventually have to pay a cost-reflective tariff in the future, even as cheaper renewable energy capacity is developed. The utility needs 8,000 kilometers of new transmission lines for its future energy plans.
In terms of the overall debt burden that Eskom carries, the majority of that debt is actually not attributable to the capital expenditure per se, but rather to the fact that we have not had cost-reflective tariffs allowed by the regulator. Regardless of the mix of funding that we seek to pursue, users will have to pay a tariff that rewards the capital that is invested in generation, distribution, and transmission capacity.
Eskom plans to reduce coal consumption to 40% of total energy supply by 2030. 3 old coal-fired power stations are set for decommissioning between now and 2026. By then, 6 out of a total of 13 coal-fired power stations will be mothballed. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Johannesburg, South Africa.
Malawi is also suffering from a growing electricity deficit. According to the World Bank, electricity rationing loses Malawi loses Malawi up to 7% of its GDP a year. This is more than any other country in Africa. In comparison, Kenya, Niger, Madagascar and Benin all lose under 2%. We bring you the story of one self-taught electrician who's keeping the lights on in his village in Malawi with just an old bike and a farm motor. CGTN's Astatal has the details.
15 years ago, when darkness used to fall in Yobe Nkosi, a remote village in northern Malawi, children did their homework by candlelight.
In the past, we had to study by candlelight, and whenever there was no money to buy candles, we could not study.
That began to change in 2006, when Conrad Nkosi finished secondary school in Zimba, some 40 kilometers away, and returned home. He was 23 years old at the time and had no prior training. Nkosi discovered that a creek running through his childhood home had just enough force to propel his bicycle forward. He devised an improvised dynamo to provide power to his residents.
There is potential to produce enough power for 1,000 households from that single turbine, and I can use the same river to power another turbine downstream.
With no prior experience, Nkosi converted an old refrigerator compressor into a water power turbine and installed it into a local river, generating enough electricity for 6 families. The village is now fed by a large turbine, which was made from the motor of a decommissioned maize sheller, a machine that removes corn kernels from the cob. The device has been installed on the fringes of the community. Metal wires are strung from a 2-kilometer line of tree trunks, caped with wooden planks to provide power. The consumers do not pay a cost for the electricity, but they do pay Nkosi a monthly maintenance fee of slightly more than $1 per home. For the 38-year-old, however, the maintenance income is insufficient to meet the cost of repairs, which at times he says he pays out of his own pocket.
I wish I could find a sponsor to help me fulfill my plan of going back to school to further my knowledge and pass on what I have learned to others.
Meanwhile, back at the village, students file into a classroom for a nighttime study session as dusk falls over Kazangazi Primary School. And it's all thanks to Nkosi. Astatal, CGTN.
Algeria, the only country which was still pumping leaded petrol into vehicles, exhausted its final stocks in July. This brought an end to the use of leaded petrol globally. Following the success of its campaign to end the use of leaded petrol, the UN is calling for similar initiative towards emissions-free transport and tackling climate change. Alexandria Majala has more.
The UN's environmental programme's 19-year campaign to end the use of leaded petrol has finally borne fruit. Leaded petrol has now been eliminated after the world's last remaining stocks were used up last month. This effectively brings to an end the use of the poisonous substance that poses major health and environmental risks.
Leaded fuel illustrates in a nutshell the kind of mistakes that humanity has been making at every level of our societies. The kind of mistakes that have brought us to the triple planetary crisis, the crisis of climate change, the crisis of biodiversity loss, and the crisis of pollution.
According to UNEP, the petrol contaminates air, soil, and drinking water and can cause heart disease, stroke, and cancer. Some studies have shown it harms brain development, especially in children. The agency worked with governments, businesses, and civic groups to eradicate leaded petrol, ending its use after a century and marking a huge milestone.
Today we celebrate a milestone for multilateralism, the culmination of a united global effort to rid the world of lead in petrol, a major threat to human and planetary health. This international success story comes after a 20-year public-private initiative led by the United Nations Environment Programme.
Lead's toxicity has been recognized since Roman times. It nevertheless began being added to gasoline in the early 1920s to make cars more powerful, and from then on was used in all petrol globally until the 1970s when wealthier countries began phasing it out. By the early 2000s, 86 nations were still using leaded gasoline. The UNEP-led campaign was formed to help them move away from the fuel by driving investment and overcoming concerns around prices. UNEP warned, however, that the transport industry remained a driver of climate warming emissions, and 1.2 billion vehicles was set to hit the road in the coming decades. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Egypt will begin issuing sukuk or Sharia-compliant Islamic bonds in the first half of 2022. According to the country's finance minister, executive regulations for a new law allowing for issuance of sukuk are expected in the next 3 months. The government is also planning to form a state-owned company to manage these sukuk issuance. With the details, here's CGTN's Yasser Hakim from Cairo.
The government says it will tap the sukuk market in mid-2022. Unlike fixed-income bonds, sovereign sukuk are bonds issued to finance a certain project based on profit sharing. The government mortgages its sovereign assets for a maximum 30 years in return for the sukuk bonds. But a state-owned company will be set up first to manage the Islamic Sharia law bonds and choose the sovereign assets to be mortgaged.
The company will be responsible for releasing the sovereign sukuk bonds. It will also be in charge of pricing the bonds, attracting investors and marketing for the projects linked to the Islamic bonds. The diversification between sukuk, traditional bonds and treasury bills gives a welcome variety of financing, but I expect Islamic sukuk to be the priority in the future, especially to attract big Arab and Gulf investors. The diversification would help efforts to reduce balance of payments deficit and support the state budget.
Egypt's finance minister says the sukuk bonds market is approximately $3 trillion internationally, hence why the government is speeding up the process to take a share from this huge market. Some experts predict the first issuance in 2022 to be in the range of $2 billion.
Yes, but we cannot say exactly how much bonds will be issued because the feasibility studies for the related projects are still ongoing. The sukuk are related to long-term projects, mainly national projects. We are talking about developmental projects such as the Dignified Life project to develop the Egyptian rural areas and attract investors to this sector. The president has also spoken about including the new administrative capital, a major project that would attract huge investment through the new mechanism.
The Islamic bonds couldn't have come at a better time, as the government needs more financing to continue developing its infrastructure and economy, as well as to recover from the fallout of the coronavirus pandemic. Yes, Hakim for CGTN, Cairo.
A leading U.S. trade body says higher tariffs on Chinese goods are triggering inflation in the U.S. and around the world, with small and medium-sized enterprises the biggest victims. Robin van Puyenbroek, Executive Director of the World Trade Centers Association and a keynote speaker at this year's China International Fair for Trade in Services, tells CGTN that China has a special advantage in the global supply chain as it is the world's second-largest consumer market.
Despite decoupling rhetoric and exhausting high tariff, actually China-US trade is booming if we look at the trade volume data. How do you explain this? And under these circumstances, do you think the high tariff on Chinese goods is sustainable?
Why has this sustained even during the pandemic? I think this is just to prove the evidence that the economy of China, and you mentioned the United States in particular, are so interconnected and so intertwined. The supply chains are so interconnected that it's just a simple tariff here or there, and I'm not trying to diminish the impact of the tariffs, but the fact that the tariffs are there is not going to change that dynamic. You cannot just decouple or untangle the two largest trading blocs in the world from each other, especially since they've been integrating with each other for such a long time. For decades. If it comes to tariffs, I am absolutely not a big fan of tariffs. I think tariffs are counterproductive. I think this is just sort of a backstop that looks good on paper. And one side note of that is that the greatest victim of higher tariffs, of the instability in the global trade infrastructure we have, are small and medium enterprises. And small and medium enterprises are still the bread and butter of the economy in most countries, in most regions. So we need to make sure that infrastructure also works for them. Tariffs cannot regulate how the economy needs to work. And at the end of the day, let's not forget what we see now. Prices are going up in many countries in the world. We see inflation rising. to very high numbers, and it's the consumer, it's the worker who pays the bill of tariffs. So I think, again, this is one of those areas where the large trading blocs, and especially in context of the WTO, we need to really look at making the trade infrastructure work for everyone. We need to make sure that the global trade infrastructure is inclusive, so it works for everyone.
There's a lot of discussion on global supply chain during the pandemic, as it is affected in many industries like the chip industry. Some Western experts advise the companies to move part of supply chain out of China. Do you agree with this? And how do you look at China's position and role in global supply chain?
I would even say that China is extremely well positioned to continue to be a manufacturing powerhouse. If you also look at the fact that, as I mentioned earlier, the Chinese market is currently the second largest economy in the world, and will most likely soon become the largest economy in the world. So this also means that if you a Fortune 500 company, let's say, one of the large multinational company, in terms of supply chain management and reaching your consumers, you always want to be close to your major markets. And although Chinese labor may be, because you mentioned China specifically, may be getting more expensive, it's the overall production costs that matters. And China is still a very competitive place to be due to the productivity of its workforce. It's the completeness of the supply chain. China has a very sophisticated logistical infrastructure. So all those things come together that I think makes China still the key market for companies to be. And if you just look at the numbers, the UN Conference on Trade and Development released its numbers, its FDI, foreign direct investment numbers for 2020, and I think China brought in a record $163 billion in inflow in FDI, which was the largest in the world. So I think that number itself tells us that money is just still flowing to China, and China is also developing, also producing more sophisticated, high-end goods here. So I would not be concerned about supply chains leaving China for purely political reasons. I think companies think long-term and think very hard of where to put their dollars. And again, given the fact that China is such also the world's largest almost consumer market, we'll make sure that it'll have its place in any global supply chain.
Coming up in sports news. Africa dominate women's T41 discus throw as Tunisia slightly takes gold.
How would you create your legend? On the fields, on the tracks,